Hi, I'm Josh Rushing, sitting in for Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, protesters in Taiwan are taking to the streets and taking over Congress. We'll discuss why a Chinese trade deal has citizens up in arms. Our digital producer Malika Bilal is here today. Tell us, what does our community say about this one?
Well, a lot of people are sharing images using this hashtag sunflower movement. And so you see people online referencing people on the street, young and old, pictures like this. They're holding sunflowers, they're holding signs. And that significance behind the sunflower movement was explained to us on Facebook. Sunflower Movement writes to us, it's a symbol of hope and positivity. We wish Taiwan to be like a sunflower, facing the light, leaving darkness behind. And as organizers say, that darkness is the lack of government transparency. So of course we want to hear from you on this topic. You can use that hashtag, but also use our hashtag AJStream for your questions and comments.
You got to be proud of the community today. The show actually came from someone in our community, right? They pitched it on Facebook. Yeah, I love that when that happens too. It was pitched to us by Amy Chang Chen in Taipei. Do you have an idea for a future episode? If so, tell us about it at facebook.com/AJStream. Your suggestion could end up being in the stream.
Hi, I'm Nicky Cheong. I'm a digital consultant from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and I'm in the stream.
It's been dubbed the Sunflower Movement. Hundreds of Taiwanese students have staged a sit-in protest for nearly 2 weeks now, occupying Congress to oppose a trade pact between Taiwan and China. Opponents say the trade deal will cost Taiwanese people jobs, while supporters believe more business with China will keep the island economically competitive. Demonstrations against the ruling Kuomintang or KMT party are continuing to grow, with more than 100,000 taking part in rallies Sunday. The public's anger toward the trade agreement speaks to a larger fear of China's growing influence over Taiwan. Student protesters criticize their government for selling out the country. They're also calling for greater government transparency on cross-strait policies. So today we examine the Sunflower Movement and ask how Taiwan's increasing ties with China will impact the country. Here to discuss these issues with us is Lin Zujia. He's Deputy Minister of Mainland Affairs Council. Roy Chun Lee, the Deputy Director of the Taiwan WTO Center. He favors more trade with China. From the occupied Congress protest in the Legislative Yuan, we have Lin Fei Fan, a student leader of the Sunflower Movement. He'll be speaking to us through a translator. And Wu Rui Ren, a protester and associate research fellow at the Academia Sinica Institute. Welcome to all of our guests who are joining us via Skype from Taipei. I'd like to begin with Lin Fei Fan. I'm going to pull up a Ustream clip here. You can go to our Storyfy page and find this. This is actually a Ustream live from where the students are occupying. Lin Fei Fan, will you tell us what the atmosphere is like there? I know we're in the middle of the night right now, but during the day, what are the students doing in there?
At the moment in the parliament, a lot of students are sleeping because it's 3:30 a.m. However, there are still some students discussing the movement and what they are going to do next. Earlier today, what we were doing was that in the morning we held a press conference. We iterated our demand to the government. We said that we have to pass a legislation before we review the Cross-Strait Service Act.
Professor Wu, can you expand on,
Yes.
on why you're doing what you're doing?
Why I'm doing what I'm doing? Well, because you see, we are protesting against both the form and content of the so-called trade and service agreement with China. In terms of form, we protest against the extremely undemocratic way by which the KMT government sought to pass the agreement in legislature. In terms of content, we protest against a total lack of concern on part of the KMT government as to the inherent threats of the agreement to both the national and social security of Taiwan, well, simply put.
Deputy Minister Lin Zujia, can you respond to that?
We think that service trade agreement is a pure economic issue. We hope that by passing this trade service agreement, so that we can have a more business with mainland. At the same time, China could have some investment in Taiwan so that we can create more jobs in Taiwan. So it's going to help Taiwan's economic development.
Yeah, can I respond to that?
Yes, absolutely.
Of course, economic independence is inseparable from political independence. Can you imagine China running USA's public transportation or subcontracting its strategic sectors? In international relations, economic issues are never simply economic, they're always political.
Deputy Minister, can you explain to us now what is the current status of the trade relationship between Taiwan and China?
Well, actually, China accounts about 40% of our total export, but during the past 6 years, we keep the same proportion. What I'm saying here is that when we try to make a more trade with mainland China, at the same time, we already signed FTA with New Zealand and Singapore last year, and we try to participate on TPP and RCEP too. So what I'm saying is that we use the so-called dual track strategy. We like to have more trade with mainland, at the same time we like to have more trade with other countries too.
But
so
Deputy Minister, how much trade with China would be too much?
I don't know, but at least during the past 6 years, we keep a very stable proportion with mainland. We did not increase our trade dependence on mainland China.
Roy, I want to get the community in here, and Roy, I want to direct this to you because there's something that Professor Wu said a little bit earlier in his answer. He said he had a problem with the undemocratic way in which this was passed, and that's a quote. So a lot of people online are saying something similar. On Facebook, Nathan says the lack of transparency in the policy-making process is something that infuriated the majority of citizens. Another person, John on Facebook, writes, the protest is more against the ruling party that has only 9% approval rate, this person says, ramming through a secret trade agreement. And one more direct question. This just came in live. Someone wants us to ask who signed the trade deal and on whose authority, and why weren't those details made public? So there's a lot of people talking about the fact that they say this was not transparent enough. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, I in my personal understanding, I think the services trade agreement with China is important for Taiwan, not only for the cross-strait trade investment, but also as a critical step for Taiwan to join the broader Asia-Pacific regional integration. But I also agree that there is a lack of transparency in the process of the negotiation. And also, I also agree that the way the KMT, the ruling party, KMT, is handling the agreement in the parliament is subject to a lot of challenge. Now, I would like to respond to Professor Wu's comment on the risk of the agreement. Now, I think in many of the remarks, I understand there's always a risk between Taiwan and China because China is trying to provoke its political agenda against Taiwan, and we all understand that well. But I think, as for the agreement per se, I think we need to have a more precise risk assessment. Now, in terms of risk assessment, we are not talking about a zero risk with China. There's nothing that is zero risk. But what we are assessing is the probability of that risk to take place, and also if it takes place, do we have sufficient mechanism to control and manage the risk? Now, he mentioned transportation and other liberalization that is subject to some kind of risk. Now, I must say that liberalization on the agreement itself doesn't translate into actual investment. That is the first thing. Second thing, for example, transportation. I cannot imagine any government under any party in Taiwan will be franchising our transportation to a mainland China company. So that is what I'm arguing. We don't have to exaggerate the probability of that risk. There is a risk.
Hey, Roy, we're losing your signal a little bit, so why don't we let Professor Wu respond to that? Professor Wu, sounds like Roy is saying you're exaggerating the risk.
I'm not exaggerating the risk at all, because for one thing, the risk assessment is exactly one of the crucial things that the KMT has never done yet. Okay, that's why people are worrying so much here, because we are worried that because China has a political agenda. Okay, so I'm not sure. Actually, I don't think that the KMT actually has made any assessment of that, reasonable assessment of that. And also the other thing is that actually there are too many loopholes in the current regulations, or in which they can enter, they can control Taiwanese business, through backdoor channels.
Yeah,
so
well, I would like to respond on the transparency issue first. Actually, we do a lot of communication with industry before we sign the agreement. According to the record from Ministry of Economic Affairs, we have held more than 100 forums with 46 industries before signing agreements. And also, we make 3 times of briefing on Legislative Yuan, 3 months before we sign this agreement. And we also go to talk to each individual legislators a lot of times. So most of those legislators, they know that we are going to sign the service trade agreements with mainland China. The problem is that we did not tell them the very detail about which sectors we are really going to open, because according to the national standards, it's almost impossible to tell the details about the contents of the agreements.
Let's go to Lin Fei Fan, who is actually in the yuan right now, occupied. Lin, Deputy Minister Lin Zhujia is telling us that they held many forums, that they communicated with the legislators, that they've met with the industries. They say that they have been transparent enough in this. What is the students' response to that?
I think the fundamental question we have to ask is that is such communication enough before?
Okay, I tell you what, we're not going to get a response from Lin Fei Fan right now because we have some audio issues with that. But Professor Wu, before you respond to it, I'd like to throw out a YouTube video when we talk about the KMT handling of this. The students recently tried to expand the occupation, and we see how government forces reacted to the students in doing that. And at least from the videos posted online, it seems quite violent. First, we'll come back to this video, but Professor Wu, can you respond to Lin Zhujia's assertion that they have been very transparent in this process?
Not at all. Actually, well, I mean, it goes without saying that there's no transparency whatsoever. What he was talking about was formalistic, and actually, the whole thing is that the government has not ever communicated with the people that whose life will be affected, not only the business owners. Okay, and one more thing, the whole thing cannot be reduced to an economic matter. The whole thing, as I said, in IR, in international relations, the relation between China and Taiwan is basically political. Okay, the whole thing is like what is at stake here is the plain fact that a large and super powerful state, an empire if you like, with territorial ambition over Taiwan, is trying to control this island nation from economic means such as trade agreements. You see, the whole situation is very similar to what the Nazi Germany did to the neighboring small states such as Romania and Bulgaria in the late 1930s. At first, the German would make some concession to induce the small states to depend solely on the German market. And then when geopolitical crises such as World War II broke out, Germany would use the economic dependence as leverage to control the small states and turn them into protectorates. What happened to Bulgaria in 1941 is happening to Taiwan today.
Wow,
Silly,
Roy, you want to respond to that?
Yes, can I make just a quick remark?
Yes, please do.
Now, let's come back to this risk assessment. The risk assessment includes not only economic risk, but also the political risk that Professor Wu is mentioning now. And I think I am in agreement. I understand what Professor Wu is arguing, but let's imagine a world for Taiwan without the services trade agreement. Will Taiwan become more secure and less dependent on China? I think according to our study, the reverse will appear, because without we believe that we'll be able to join the Asia-Pacific broader regional integration through using the services agreement as a stepping stone. Now, of course, with the services agreement, there's no guarantee that we'll be able to join, but without the services agreement, it is almost 100% sure that we will be blocked somehow by China. Now, we don't like the idea of being blocked by China, but let's just imagine, without the services agreement, it is very likely that we're not going to join the regional integration process. And so what is going to happen is that we will have very limited access to other markets except China. So that is what I'm arguing. I'm arguing that without the services agreement, well, we become more secure and less dependent on China.
Well, actually, there's an answer for you here on Twitter. There is an answer for you, and it's interesting, Josh, because I am seeing this dichotomy in people that are tweeting us on both sides of this. So on one hand, you have something like this. Nakul on Twitter says, this would create more jobs, it would boost the Taiwanese economy to some extent, and it would allow further economic integration with China. Of course, there are people who don't want that. On the other hand, there's a video comment here from that other side. Lin Zhuja, have a listen to this video comment and let me know what you think.
The social movement against the lack of transparency of Taiwan's trade pact with China is very significant because it allows the world to learn the important fact that the Taiwanese are open to good diplomatic and economic relations with China. However, they're extremely wary on any agreement Taiwan signs with China without proper government oversight, as the existential threat China posed for Taiwan is very real to the Taiwanese. It also demonstrated the extent to which the Taiwanese value their democracy.
So Lin Zhuza, she mentions existential threat. That's one thing, but I'd also like you to pick up on her saying that it needs government oversight. Is that something that's been promised along with this trade agreement?
Of course, we worry about the political situation in Taiwan, but it doesn't mean that we don't need economic development. I mean, when we signed FTA with Singapore last year, we signed FTA with New Zealand. We do exactly the same standard procedure to communicate with industry, with different sectors, and with legislative members. So we do very exactly the same, which means that we are really transparent. Of course, we need we know that China has some kind of political threat for us. So when we say we have FTA with mainland, it is a very low standard FTA. We simply give China some kinds of WTO standard. So we are just open a very a minimum amount of market to mainland China. So of course we are really care about this.
You can go to Twitter and see some amazing photographs from the sunflower movement. Here, I have one up on my screen now. This is pretty incredible. Looks like they're getting sprayed down with hose there. It's from Jing Wei Chao. I'd like to go back into the Occupy Congress and ask Lin Feifan, how long can the students hold out there, and what is next for the students?
So far, we've entered the 14th day of our occupation. So far, we're still waiting proper response from the presidential palace. Basically, we hope that the movement can continue. We hope to keep occupying the parliament. We expect that the president can respond positively to our demands before we leave.
Hey, Professor Wu, have you actually seen the bill that we're talking about? Has it been made fully public? And what is the status of it in terms of passing through the government there?
I think it's only passed, barely passed the first reading. You see, this is the whole thing, that the whole thing can run into trouble because they try to force it during the first reading, so it hasn't even passed the first reading.
But Professor, have you seen the bill? Has the bill been made public?
Yes, I mean I read it. Yeah, I read it. Yeah, roughly. Yeah, because yeah.
And when is the next step in terms of the bill moving forward?
Well, it's hard to say because even the first reading was, the whole process, the whole procedure of the first reading is, legally very problematic. So we don't know yet because, still, it's still in, under debate. And I believe that the President Ma has promised to return to, the state before the first reading. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the government's final decision, and I don't know what's the result of this confrontation. It depends on the result of this confrontation.
So, Roy, is it just a matter of scope on this? I mean, there are trade relations with China now. Are there safeguards in the bill that would keep trade at what people would think is a safe level? Are people just arguing about how much trade, or the very idea of trade at all?
Well, Josh, that's a very good question. Let's address the issue of what we call in the trade agreement as escaping clause. Now, there are several mechanisms included in the agreement that will allow Taiwan or either side, even China, to escape from the obligation of the agreement. There is actually a provision, Article 8 of the agreement, saying that if there is a sector that is substantially affected by the liberalization, we can negotiate to see how both sides is going to address the issue. And there's also a clause, a provision in the agreement saying that we can always withdraw any commitments 3 years after the agreement came to effect if we believe that the obligation is producing negative impact. And what's more important is that in the framework agreement that is concluded in 2010, there is an escaping clause saying that either party, especially Taiwan, will terminate and can terminate the agreement 180 days after the notification to the other side, to China, without any reason. So that is what I'm arguing. We are arguing that there is an escaping clause, and if we believe that there is a problem after implementation of the agreement, we can always terminate the agreement, even without a termination clause.
It's interesting you're saying that. I am wondering whether our community that is, they are part of the student protesting movement, whether they're hearing that and whether they believe it. Because Josh, I just got this tweet a couple minutes ago. Natalia writes in, to what extent does the Taiwanese government take the protesting students seriously? So Professor Wu, in our last few minutes here of our show, I want to go to you with this because we recently got a video comment from two people who pitched this show to us. They're student journalists and they're on the ground in Taiwan. And the question arises whether or not these methods are counterproductive. Have a look at this video comment and let me know what you think after.
The demonstrators expanded their protest on March 23rd by invading the another government building, the executive building. This drastic action forced the anti-riot police to compel the crowds out of the compound of the executive building. And this ongoing social movement is considered to be the biggest in the past 20 years in Taiwan.
So Professor Wu, she mentioned drastic efforts, and that's of course storming the executive building. Are these methods going to work? Or are they counterproductive?
Well, I mean, in terms of consequence, I think it somehow worked. Ironically, the process, the procedure of decision making was a little bit hasty, and because given the tremendous pressure that the students was undergoing, But anyway, and also because the extreme difficulty of carrying out the whole task, But I think ironically, or it's like a twist of the counting of history, has shown that,
wait, Professor Wu, let me stop you right there at the ironic twist of history. And you're going to get to finish that answer, but you're going to do it in our online post show. So if you're watching this right now at home and you're not on your computers, go to your computers, stream.aljazeera.com, so you can hear about the ironic twist of history Professor Wu is about to share with us. And on our next show, African hip-hop artists, they pride themselves on social consciousness. But what are they fighting for? Well, we're going to find out with a Senegalese group, Corgi, plus artists from Mozambique, Mali, and South Africa. Until then, stay with us. The post show is next to stream.aljazeera.com, and we'll see you online. Welcome back. This is the Streams Online Post Show. We're talking about Taiwan's sunflower movement and how trade relations with China could impact the island. Now let's get back to the conversation. Professor Wu, you had the entire Stream audience on the edge of our seats with the ironic twist of history. Please continue.
So you see, the students were under, tremendous pressure, right? And the government, made its decision not to respond to the students. So you see, they were trying to wait for the student movement to die out. Okay, so the government, I think this is the government's intention. So under this, very tremendous pressure to compete with the government, which is very, very powerful and well equipped. So, they have to figure out some way to give new momentum to the movement. I think this is what, the so-called quote-unquote drastic action of occupying the administrative yuan was one of the sort of improvised, a method, try to break the status quo and try to create new momentum to the movement. And of course, throughout the process, some problems occurred, and then, unfortunately, many students and many, citizens were injured. But somehow, in the end, because of the police violence, somehow create a lot of sympathy from the press and from the society. So that's why I say it's a twist of history. It's sort of a counting of history, which eventually created new momentum for the movement. Okay.
Well, we're sorry. I'm very sorry to hear that. We are Taiwan is a democratic country. We have a rule of law. So all of our citizens have the obligation to abide by the rule of law. So I think that for those students use a forcible occupation on legislative yuan and on the executive yuan is kind of irrational and disruptive behavior. Say, I would like to ask, suppose the Capitol Hill of US was occupied by the students. What the U.S. government will do?
Lin Feifan, I'd like to get you to respond directly to Lin Zhuzhia. He's saying that Taiwan is a democracy and has the rule of law, and that the students there in your occupation have gone around both of those. How do you respond to that?
The thing is, the Ma administration, when it is signing the agreement, it's opaque. The process is opaque, and the review afterwards is illegal. That's the problem. And it is because the procedure is not justified, it's not legal. That is why we people have to occupy the parliament and do not cooperate with the government.
But Lin Feifan, let me ask you, how can you say what they're doing is legal when what you are doing, in fact, is illegal?
The government broke the law first. That is why we citizens have the right to disobey the government. This is the right we have, because the legitimacy of the current administration is lacking, and the government is trampling democracy and human rights, and we cannot tolerate it anymore.
Professor Wu, do you want to jump in on this? Are you going around the rule of law? I mean, I think his argument is that they broke the law first, so now we shall break the law.
No, not exactly. I think what he wanted to say is that what we are doing is civil disobedience, which I think is a very often, very common thing in the United States. And by the way, I'm appalled and stunned by the fact that Mr. Lin should have, quoted a U.S. example, because I don't think that any U.S. congressman will secretly pass legislation in 30 seconds. And that's what happened in Taiwan. That's why we have to disobey. You see, this is a moral obligation, and then we are prepared to take the responsibility. Okay.
Well, the reason they passed the law in 30 seconds is because what happened in the Interior Commission in Legislative Yuan is that the opposition party occupied the chairman's seat, so that the chairman who belonged to the KMT cannot call the meeting. That's the problem. If DPP, the opposition party, did not occupy the chairman's seat, and then the meeting can follow the suit, then that kind of things will not happen.
Well, Roy, online, people are widening this out a bit. We've already brought up China, and it's coming up again online. Shuzha tweets in that any type of economic deal with China would mean some kind of influence over Taiwan. And so you see that tweet, and then things like this are being shared. This is an editorial cartoon that was in the International New York Times today, and of course it has a Trojan horse. It has a wooden horse here. It says trade pack, and it has a little tag that says love from China about to enter Taiwan, where people are angrily protesting. So that leads us to this Facebook comment where Daniel writes in, as a Hong Kongese, I am definitely against this. If Taiwan signs this, it will allow Chinese firms to take part in industries where the majority is Taiwanese small firms. It will be just like Hong Kong again. Is that correlation valid? And also that threat that clearly some people feel that this is going to turn into a situation like Hong Kong?
No. The Hong Kong situation is totally different from what we have in Taiwan. You know, Hong Kong is one country and two systems. Hong Kong was occupied by mainland China, but we are totally different. When we negotiate with mainland, we are on the equally foot. So the agreements between Taiwan and mainland China is totally different between the agreement with mainland and Hong Kong. Take the tourists as an example. Every year there are more than 40 million tourists from China to Hong Kong, and Hong Kong only have 7 million in population. But in Taiwan, we have 23 million people. However, there's only 2.8 million Chinese people come to Taiwan. So the story between Hong Kong and Taiwan is totally different. We should not compare these two.
Yeah, but how can you say you're on equal footing with China when economically you're just not? Like, China's never going to depend on Taipei economically, but Taipei could end up depending on Beijing.
Yeah,
No, I think he should get a chance. I think Lin Zhuzha should get a chance to respond, the deputy minister, since I asked him.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, of course we know that mainland China is large, but when we allow Chinese investment come to Taiwan, we carefully choose only certain kind of industry are allowed to come to Taiwan. For the large sectors with a monopoly company or oligopoly type of industry are not allowed. So like mass media, telecommunication, banking are not allowed from mainland to Taiwan. Only like hairdressing, restaurant, retailing, only those small business types of business are allowed from mainland China to Taiwan. So we really care about what kind of industry are open to allow a Chinese investment to come to Taiwan.
Lin Feifan, I know you're trying to jump in there. Let's go to you.
Yeah. Mr. Lin said that the latest development today, early this morning, the KMT, the ruling party, apologized publicly, that they passed the law in 30 seconds. They said it was wrong. They publicly apologized. And Deputy Minister Lin actually avoided this issue. I don't think he should be doing this. This is a lie to the international stage.
Professor Wu, I know you also wanted to jump in there.
Yes, I just want to provide one, very simple and straightforward statistics, And in terms of Taiwan's, the ratio of the trade, Taiwan's trade with China over Taiwan's GDP rose from 1991, rose from 11% from in 1991 to the 38% in 2011. Within 20 years, it tripled. But in terms of China is much less dependent upon Taiwan. The ratio of China's dependency on Taiwan in 1991 is 3%, and in 2011 is 2.5%. You see, so there's a very clear asymmetrical dependency, interdependence relationship between the two states. This is the only effect that I want to provide for the audience.
Roy, can you respond to that?
Comment on that? Mm-hmm. Yes. Let's see now. As Professor Wu correctly pointed out, over the last 2 decades, Taiwan's trade and investment dependency on China increases over time. But let's not forget that during these 2 decades, we have several different political parties taking power in Taiwan. Some of the parties are more against China than the KMT. So what I'm arguing is that we have actually tried different therapies to address the issue of dependency in the last 2 decades. And it proves that we need an alternative, innovative way to address the issue, because against China or even closer to China doesn't really solve the problem.
All right, thanks, Roy. And actually, you know what? We're going to have to end it on that one. So I want to thank all of our guests in Taipei: Lin Zhuzhia, Roy Chun Lee,
Yes.
Lin Fei Fan, and Wu Rei Ren. Now remember, the conversation continues at #AJStream. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.